Well, it turns out my husband's stepdaughter is actually his mistress, and he's been having an affair behind my back this whole time. Yeah, with his stepdaughter. A wise man once said, "The devil you know is better than the angel you don't know." And, well, all along I used to believe it was just a proverb people loved quoting until something happened to me. When Mark and I met, we promised each other that we would not do anything to hurt each other emotionally or in any form. He said he wanted to get married again because he needed a companionship and a mother to his stepdaughter, Emily. Mark said his ex-wife had given him a tough time, and he never actually enjoyed his previous marriage. He claimed that she was a serial cheat, and had gotten reports from his neighbors about her bringing back home different men when he had traveled or gone back to work. Not just that, his ex-wife Natalie was a drug addict, and it was so bad that she brought her fellow drug addict men to the home. Exactly. He was tired of having his heart in his mouth. Natalie had been to rehab twice, but there was no changes. Mark told me she did not mind selling stuff at home just to get money to buy drugs. And when she was really desperate, she could even go as far as stealing the money. Well, or even breaking her young daughter's piggy bank. Before Natalie and Mark got married, Natalie already had a young daughter who came as a result of one of her sexual escapades. And unfortunately, she had him for one of her drug addict friends who was serving a prison sentence for trying to smuggle drugs into the country. Emily was just 5 years old when they got married to each other, and Mark took it upon himself just to be the father figure she needed. He said the more reason he married Natalie was that Emily would have a good upbringing and not follow her mother's path. After marriage, they tried to have a child together, but because of Natalie's fluctuating mental and physical state, he knew it was not going to be a good idea. Already, Natalie did not look like she was going to quit drugs anytime soon, and with her kind of personality, she would not care about the effect it would have on the baby. So, he just decided it was better to take care of Emily as his own biological daughter. He made a lot of sacrifices and adjustments and tried to get medical help for Natalie, but no matter how much he tried, he could not help her. She passed away some years later after running around and running away from her home, leaving Mark to care for Emily alone. They tried looking for her in different trap houses. They even took her picture and went to the places they knew she used to go to. But later on, they found out that she did not just run away from the house. She eloped with a man. And that's when Mark stopped looking for her. A couple years later, Emily received a call that her mother passed away. Within those years, it was very difficult for them, but because of Natalie's death, Emily did not get the opportunity to know what a real mother's love felt like, or what it felt like to have a mother always available in her life, and in some way it affected her personality. She only talked when she was spoken to, and she found it difficult to make friends at school or wherever she went to. Aside from being my lover, Emily was one of the reasons Mark used us to get married. He did not just want a wife, he wanted a mother to his stepdaughter, and I simply loved Emily, who was now a teenager, and I didn't want her to spend the rest of her life believing that there was something wrong with her, and that's why her mother left. You see, Emily was 14 years old when Mark and I got married, and I must confess that she was a very sweet, innocent little girl. Each day I woke up, I wanted to remind her that she was loved. She was appreciated deeply. We loved her. I'd been married once, but after I caught my husband cheating on me with my former best friend, we divorced, and I didn't want to date or get married ever again because I believed all men were the same. I loved Ken, my ex-husband, so much, and even when I began suspecting something fishy going on with him, I wanted to let it slide because I did not want it to be true. But in the end, it was. I caught Ken and my ex-best friend in a motel in bed together. The craziest thing was that she was pregnant and I helped her in shopping for baby stuff. setting up her son's room while making plans for a surprise baby shower, not knowing that she was pregnant for my husband the whole time. We divorced, and that was it. When Mark came to me, I gave him a very tough time, but after a while of pestering me, I believed he was different from other men, and that was why I gave him a shot. We got married, and I moved into his house, and lived like one big happy family. Mark and I agreed that I was not ready to be a mother, and he was fine by that. We already had Emily as our daughter, and I believed that with our joint love, she'd grow up to be a beautiful, motivated, strong woman. After a year of being married to Mark, Emily started to come out of her shell. She laughed more at family dinner jokes, and she contributed to our conversation. I also noticed that Emily responded more and chose to hang around her father more than she did with me. And I did not think there was anything wrong with that. For someone who spent almost her entire life with him, it's quite normal for her to be more attached to her dad. I also tried my best just to make her understand that she could come to me for anything she needed. And I even asked her a couple of times to bring her friends home so I could meet them all. I deliberately put effort to be a part of her life because she had been hurt by so many, by her late mom, and I wanted her to see that the problem was her mother's drug addiction issues, not her. Fortunately, she began to come around. She brought back her friends from school as I asked her, but she never introduced me to a boy. I was particularly interested in her love life because I knew that most of her friends were in a relationship, and it was important for me that she ended up with the right kind of boy. The issue of teenagers going into drugs was very popular in the state we lived in, and I did not want her to ruin her life. Losing her mother because of drugs was a good reason for her to stay away from the drugs for the rest of her life with peer pressure. She could do the things she said that she'd never do. I noticed that each time I asked her about her boyfriend, she would just change the topic, and at one point I began to believe she was into girls. But I confirmed she wasn't after I told her that I would support her no matter what her sexual preference was. Well, she just laughed at me and told me she was straight, and if she was a lesbian or bisexual, we would have known it a long time ago. She told us she did not have a boyfriend yet, and whenever she did, I would be the first to know it. With the topic of her boyfriend completely out of the way, Mark and I did not raise the topic again. We believed that whatever she was ready, she would tell me like she said she would, and I would simply break the good news to Mark. Also, a couple of times, Emily had jokingly said that when she'd be looking for a boyfriend, she'd be looking for a man like Mark. And Mark would respond with, "You better not. Daddy's the best, and there's always one of me in the whole wide world." And they would just laugh about it. I don't know, I thought it was sweet of Emily to want a man like her father, and I even encouraged her to not be in a hurry until she found exactly the kind of quality she was looking for in a man. All along, I thought I was aware of everything that was going on in the house, but I had no idea something terrible was brewing behind my back. When I married Mark, I noticed that he had the habit of going to bed late. He would watch his favorite shows for a couple hours, and after that, he would go to Emily's room before coming to join me in bed. At first, I thought it was going to be a one-night thing, but when it happened, over and over, I just believed Mark when he said that Emily could not sleep unless he joined her in the bed. Hearing this made me worried for the poor girl, and heck, I even encouraged Mark to stay with her until she fell asleep, and not to worry me about it. I saw how he was so attached to her and how much he loved his daughter, and all I could do was encourage him to love her more. I never knew something was going on between the two of them until the day I was cleaning the house. And I thought Emily would be relieved and happy if I helped her in cleaning her room. When I entered Emily's room, it looked like she left in a hurry because she had clothes littered on the bed of the floor. In a nutshell, everywhere was a complete mess. It was in a bid to remove one of her boots from under her bed that my hand touched a wooden box. I believe that the box contained Emily's baby pictures, and since I never had the opportunity to see them, I pulled the box out of the curiosity and I poured the contents onto her bed. I know it was bad of me to touch her stuff without her permission, but if I had not done that, maybe I would not have found out what I did. I found a couple of her baby pictures, but I also found love cards, letters, and a couple of gifts in their wraps. When I saw those letters, I thought she either wrote them to her mother or she must have had a young lover who sent her love letters, but I was all wrong. It wasn't until I opened a big brown envelope that it contained naked pictures. Mark, Emily, in bed together. My hands were shaking as I held them, and I wanted to believe that was my mind making up those images, but it wasn't. It was not. Emily and Mark were having an affair. She was Mark's mistress, and she had been living with us all along. It was not just pictures of Emily. She was 17. It went as far back as when she was around 10 years old. And Mark had been with her. I also realized that the letters were written by Emily and addressed to Mark. I also saw some from Mark, i.e., his responses to Emily's letters. I sat there, right there on Emily's bed, unable to move or even close my mouth. Guys, my heart, it was just a thumping, like it was going to jump out of my mouth. The next minute I felt my lower tummy churn. I did not know what to say. I took some of the love letters and pictures, and the ones I could not take along with me. I even took shots of the letters and photographs on my phone, and returned them to the same position I found them. I did not clean up Emily's room anymore. I let her stuff the same way I found them and just exited the room. The whole day I could not think or do anything else, and I did not want Mark or Emily to find out that I knew what was going on between them. From that moment, I began to doubt everything Mark had told me about Emily's mother. It was possible that she was not a drug addict, as he had told me, and my instincts told me there was definitely more to the story. When Emily returned home from school, I told her I wasn't feeling too well, and she jokingly asked if I was pregnant. There's no way I could have been pregnant. Mark barely touches me. Even if I made advances, by the time he returned from Emily's room, he would complain of, different things like waist pain, and the next minute he'd just fall asleep. I would smile back at Emily and told her that her father and I barely got intimate. I expected her to respond, but she said it was a grown-up discussion, and there was nothing she could do about it. My gosh, she acted so innocent. So innocent? That if I had taken alcohol that day, I would have believed that I was going crazy. I had to play along, so I laughed it off and simply apologized for telling her that in the first place. Then I grabbed my purse and took the car keys. I could have sworn that there was a smirk of victory on her face, and I had to pretend like I just didn't know what it meant. By the time that I returned home, she was already out. She left a sticky note on the freezer that she was going to see one of her friends who lived in our neighborhood. I was glad she was out because it gave me the time to install the tiny cameras I went to buy. I installed them in her room and one in the living room, the kitchen, our bedroom, and one in our bathroom. I just felt this leading to leave one there. And because I had told Emily I wasn't feeling fine that evening, she ordered takeout and I rested in the room. If I had not acted that way, they would have found out something was wrong because I was so terrible at hiding things. And to be honest with you, I didn't know what they would do to me if they knew that I was aware of their unholy affair. The whole night, I was unable to sleep, and Mark did not even notice because he came into the room by 2 a.m. after, quote, putting Emily to sleep. Yes, he claimed. By the time he came in, I was still awake, so I came up with a plan. I told him I was going to my hometown to visit my mother because I believed I was homesick. And guess what? He didn't even have a problem with that. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. I hope you're having a fantastic day. Today's story is twisted, messed up, you name it. Hopefully, this sick jerk gets what's coming to him. Guys, I have update number 1 we're about to roll into. If you're new to the channel, my name's Mr. Reddito. I narrate stories every single day. If you want to pass some time by, come stop by, see what the topic is. Make sure you subscribe, as it is the best way to support me, and I really appreciate that, guys. Let's jump into update number 1 and see what's going on. The next morning, I packed a small bag and I told Emily I was going to visit my mom for a couple of days. Then I told her it was now her responsibility to take care of Mark in the house. She gave me a warm hug and pretended she would miss me, but I wasn't falling for any of her pretenses. She was a deceptive, sneaky snake, and I didn't know all of this until I began to put pieces of the puzzle together. I knew that going to my mother's house would give them the opportunity to do their secret things openly. They took me to the airport, and while Mark drove, he was already making plans with Emily of all the fun things they would do while I was away. If I had not known what I did, I would have believed it was just a father trying to make his daughter happy and spend some quality time with her. But the more they talked about it, the more disgusted I was. When Emily noticed I wasn't saying anything, she asked if I was jealous, and I playfully admitted I was, and we all just laughed. After they dropped me off, I knew it was time to start monitoring the home. Emily and Mark returned home with 2 bottles of wine, and just as they arrived, they went straight to her room, and Emily took off her clothing. Mark would kiss all over her body and seductively led her to the bathroom. I witnessed them making love in the shower. It was too heartbreaking to see that I didn't even know when tears rolled down my eyes. After their brief quickie in the shower, they came to the room. And, well, it progressed from there. At that point, I had seen enough, and if I kept even watching more, it would be me deliberately just hurting myself. Everything I watched had been recorded, and the recording of the love letters and pictures I've gathered were enough to expose their evil act. Well, a couple of hours later, I arrived at my mom's house, and by merely just looking at me, she could tell that there was something wrong. I showed my mother everything I found, including the camera recording, and she was heartbroken too. Absolutely heartbroken too. Not heartbroken that Mark was cheating on me, but heartbroken that he was defiling his teenage daughter whom he had, well, said that he would be taking care of. That same evening, Mark called to find out if I've gotten to my mother's place, and Emily spoke to me too. I was mad at them that I almost yelled at them on the phone, but because of my mother, I had to keep everything under control. When Mark noticed that something was different about my voice, I told him I was just exhausted and I would text him before I went to bed. To show how much they wanted to keep on with their unholy affair, Mark even told me that he didn't mind if I stayed longer with my mother because Emily was taking great care of him. I laughed back, but he had no idea what that laughter meant. I was ready to expose his secret to everyone, and there was nothing he could do to stop me. Update number 2, 2 weeks later. Well, after spending 2 weeks at my mother's place and finally putting myself together, I just returned home to expose Mark and Emily. Mark was at work and Emily was in school, so no one came to pick me up at the airport. I only notified them that I was around, and that I was going home to cook something before they returned. When I got home, I took out all the cameras from the positionings that I kept them because they had done their work. My intention was to simply expose their secret on Mark's birthday, when friends and family would be gathered so they could see the kind of beast that he was. But in the process of making my plan, I found out that Emily was pregnant with Mark. It didn't really show it at first until after 3 weeks. I noticed that she looked a bit different, more swollen. Her appetite increased and her boobs looked full. Looking at her alone, I knew she was pregnant, but I pretended like I didn't even notice. Honestly, doing all this was hard for me. I drew Mark's attention to Emily Unusual's appetite, but he said she's still a growing teenager, and it wasn't out of the normal for her to have an increased appetite, so I never brought it up again. I guess he knew she was pregnant too, but he didn't want me to suspect anything, so they could go ahead and get rid of the baby on their own. But things did not turn out as expected. I found out that Emily had been pregnant for him multiple times, and she had, handled that in the past, but this time around she refused to get rid of it. She told Mark she wants the baby, so they could live a big happy family, and she did not want anyone else to be the father of her child except for Mark. And that's when things fell apart for the both of them. Mark told her it's insane for him to be a father of her children, and she had to stop acting like a child and understand that it wasn't going to be possible. When Emily heard this, she became angry and told Mark she was going to tell me about their affair and expose everything that they've been doing in the secret, but Mark threatened her. You see, one evening, Mark and I were having dinner together. Emily returned home. The moment she came in, Mark and, quote, "Emily, did you tell your mother you're pregnant?" I felt my blood freeze. I looked up at Emily and I could see the anger in her eyes. Mark had played a fast one on her and he was determined to let her take the fall alone. Emily stood there unable to say a word, then she sighed and moved forward, but the unexpected happened. Mark got up and yelled at Emily. He told her he was not interested in who got her pregnant, but she's leaving his house that night. It was a lot to take in at once. I had never seen him act that way, and that's when I understood what he was trying to do. I tried to plead with Mark, not to be so harsh on his daughter, but he said he wasn't going to suffer for her after so many years, and she would just end up like her mother. At that moment, I saw how much of a beast he was. He never loved Emily. He only used her, and the moment they had a disagreement, he figured the best thing was to kick her out so I would not find out he's responsible for getting her pregnant. Update number 3. I'll be honest with you. He knew very well that Emily struggled with self-confidence and she had nowhere to go. Also, he knew how much we avoided mentioning her mother or anything related to her because of the effect that it simply had on Emily. But he deliberately did that just to throw her off balance. And yes, with tears in her eyes, Emily went to her room and grabbed her stuff. She packed them in a big bag, and Mark watched her as she struggled out of the house that evening. I begged him to change his mind, but since it was already pre-planned, I knew he wouldn't. He dropped her pregnancy test strip on the table and claimed he found out in her dustbin when he went to fix her bathroom pipes. He lied again. There was nothing wrong with Emily's bathroom pipes, so he had no good reason to go in there in the first place. And I'd come to see her the next morning, and she left in tears. That night, neither Mark nor I said a word to each other, and he slept on the living room couch while I slept in her room. Then early in the morning, he came to explain to me that he was hurt by Emily's betrayal. He said he was disappointed that she got pregnant out of wedlock after everything we did for her, and he was afraid that, he would ruin her future and end up like her mother. I knew where he was heading and pretended I didn't know. When I suggested that Emily should keep the baby, he flared up and said he would not raise such a child in his home. And that was best if Emily just got rid of the baby so she could focus on her future. It was really wicked and selfish of him to say, but I did not counter him. I told him I would go and speak to Emily the next morning and I'd explain things to her just like he did. The next morning, I went straight to where I told Emily to sleep, and from the way she looked, it was obvious that she's been crying all night. I felt so much pity for her, and I was so mad at Mark for doing everything that he's done to her. I started by asking Emily who was responsible for her pregnancy. She said she simply did not know. I knew she was trying to cover up for Mark, and that's when I opened up to her. I told Emily I knew Mark was responsible for her pregnancy, and I was going to help her deal with him. The shock on her face confirmed everything I had said. I showed her the records from the camera and she began to apologize for ruining my marriage. At that point, it was about my marriage anymore. It was about her. It was about everything Mark's been doing to her right from when she was a little girl. Emily admitted that Mark started sleeping with her when she was a kid, and he took advantage of her because her mother was never around. He convinced Emily that sleeping with him was what daughters who love their father did, and although, well, it was a affair, she grew to love him and bonded with him, and the reason she never had a boyfriend was that Mark threatened her and told her that they would be together forever. I couldn't believe that Mark had been forcing himself on a young girl, and that was left under his care. I knew it'd be difficult to Emily just to say everything she said to me to the police, and that's why I recorded everything she said. It took me a couple of hours to convince Emily that Mark was evil, and that only evil men did that to their daughters. I took her to the police station and we reported Mark. We provided all of the evidence, including the camera records, naked pictures of Emily and Mark from the time she was little. Even the police were interested in the case and they were heartbroken to see that Emily, well, what happened to her. I took them back to the house and Mark was arrested. When he saw them with me, he pretended like he had not done anything wrong at all. Nothing, and he made it look like Emily and I were just plotting something against him. But after he was taken to the station and shown all the evidence, he can no longer argue or defend himself. We sued him in court, and he was sentenced for the abuse of a minor and turned her into an object. Emily accepted to testify against him, but this got him mad. He admitted that sleeping with Emily was her own way of paying for everything he had done for her and her mother. This response alone showed how sick he was, and I was happy that he'd be spending a very long time in the slammer. Later on, I found out that Natalie did not run out of the house as he told me. She caught him defiling Emily while she was at home, and when she reported him to the cops, they didn't believe her because she was strongly under the influence of drugs. When she tried to take Emily away from him, he kicked her out of the house and told Emily she's better off with her. I supported Emily with her decision, and I told her I would not judge her if she chose to keep the child or not. But after everything that happened, she preferred to give birth to him and give him up for adoption. We figured it would be the best thing for her and the baby, as she did not want to punish the baby for his father's sin. She got signed up for therapy and she's preparing to go to college and begin life on a fresh slate. I'm still her second mother, and she'll always be my responsibility. Guys, when I tell you this is probably the most sick, evil, twisted story that I've read about in a long time, it boils my blood to read Mark. And you know what makes me even madder? In the comment section too, it seems a lot of people had the same opinion as I did. I don't know why OP was blaming this poor girl this entire time when it was clear this was happening to her since she was a little kid. She was brainwashed by this creep of a man, Mark. And just like a lot of commenters, I'm glad he's locked behind bars, far away from this poor innocent girl, and can't hurt her anymore. So good thing on that. If you want to tell me a little bit in the comment section about what you would have done if you found this out, feel free. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the story. It made my blood boil trying to narrate it. I could not stand Mark. But let me know your opinion. Subscribe to the channel for more daily videos. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.